Today is September 19th, 2022, and I am here with Dr. Naomi Luban, who was formerly or known in medical school as Naomi Corman. Could you tell me just a little bit about where you grew up, who you grew up with, what your family was like?
So I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. My parents were not college graduates. However, education was a very, very key component to everything that my sister and I were exposed to. My sister has been a mentor and a role model for me. She's 4 years older than I am, and she had an early interest in science, which really stimulated my interest in science. And probably more importantly, our parents always said that we could be whatever we wanted to be and become whoever we wanted to become. And those elements, I think, of my upbringing really set the stage for me to recognize that nothing really needed to stand in my way. If I wanted to become a rocket scientist, I could do that. If I wanted to become a pianist, I could do that. And if I wanted to become a physician, I could do that as well.
Well, it sounds like between both your parents and then your older sister's influence, you had a lot of strong role models.
Exactly.
Tell me a bit about what school was like for you.
My sister and I both went to a local elementary school, which was within walking distance of our home. And we moved at a certain point when I was beginning 7th grade. And at that point, we kind of split up, as it were. So my sister ended up going to girls' Latin school, and I ended up going to a local junior high and eventually high school in Newton, Massachusetts. And both the middle school and absolutely for sure the high school were very much connected to Harvard School of Education. And so we had a lot of exposures that most kids would not have had. I took Latin during middle school and into high school. I had a group of girls that were mentored by a couple from Harvard School of Education on Saturdays. We went into Harvard Square to their home, and we read the classics in English, not in Latin, luckily, and had discussions about the ethics of war and what love was really all about and what the influence of Greek mythology was on novels. And it was quite a wonderful, wonderful experience, not science-focused at all. For that, I have to thank the head of the science program in my high school, who emphasized that to really know science, you had to physically do science. And so I successfully applied for and won a summer experience through the National Science Foundation at Brandeis University in a laboratory that worked on regenerative medicine. And there I was exposed to a completely different group of individuals from basically, all around the Newton, Brookline, Waltham, Lincoln area. People were highly selected to have a specific interest in science, and somehow or other all of us got to the Brandeis campus. We weren't put up on the campus, but we had a fabulous 8 or 10 week experience with centralized classes, with rotations through different laboratories, with presentation of our work. And that kind of did it for me, in concert with the fact that I had always known about the Jimmy Fund in Boston. I collected quarters for the Jimmy Fund instead of candy during Halloween. And we unfortunately had some relatives who had undergone cancer care, both adults as well as at least one child who had acute leukemia and died. And that was always an issue that was discussed around the dining room table. How was so-and-so doing now? What was happening now? How is the family coping? How are the grandparents coping? Was there anything that we, as our own small family, could do to make their difficulties somewhat attenuated? And so that's sort of the pathway right there.
Yeah, so tell me what post-high school looks like for you. I'm assuming that college was in your past.
So college turned out to, I guess in these days and times, you would say that it was somewhat of a challenge for me. First of all, I did not get into the schools that I had desired to go to. I very much wanted to go to Radcliffe, and I didn't get in. I would have been really happy with Barnard, but I didn't get in there either. I did get into Mount Holyoke, which is where my sister had gone to college, but not to start in September. And my parents were adamant that that was not a good idea. They didn't want to have me spend a block of time and not matriculate with a college class. So I ended up going to a school which was not very well known for being a pre-med hotbed. It was Connecticut College, then Connecticut College for Women. But what it did for me was make me again recognize that I could be anybody I wanted to be and do anything I wanted to do. And all of the role models of full professors in physics, in chemistry, and in the sciences were, of course, women. This is female empowerment, writ large. And I routinely went to chemistry and biochemistry classes wearing my pajama bottoms and a sweatshirt. Didn't need to worry about what you looked like. And then augmenting that, and probably another really critical element, is the fact that by this time, my sister was in a PhD program at Tufts in immunology. And she arranged for me to have a bunch of interviews with different labs that took college students. And so for the 4 summers of my college years, I guess it was actually 3, because then I went to medical school. So for at least 3 summers and for a college thesis, I did cancer biology under the mentorship of a Japanese investigator by the name of Hirohoki Ide, who was this small, very, very quiet, very intense gentleman who had remarkable bench skills and taught me things that very few college students ever had experience with. I learned how to dissect mice. I learned how to make protein concentrates. I learned how to euthanize animals and homogenize all of their organs. I learned microscopy skills, and I wrote a thesis for graduation from college that was based on those summer experiences. During my senior year, I had a big block of time when I was allowed to do research as part of that honors thesis, and I would carry my mice from Tufts back on the train to Connecticut College, covered in a knit cozy that my mother made so that people wouldn't know that I was actually carrying mice back and forth, which is pretty hysterical. That was my college experiences from a scientific perspective, and kind of really, I thought would be very, very, very impressive when I was applying to medical school. So I was applying to medical school at the height of the Vietnam War. And I don't think that medical schools specifically stated this, but there were quotas for women. Very, very few women were admitted to medical school. And that was a problem for me. And so I was waitlisted at Tufts. I did not get into Yale, which was a big disappointment because my chemistry professor at Connecticut was absolutely sure that I was a shoo-in, and she was absolutely thrilled that I was going to be in the Connecticut area, and she was just a very wonderful person. Again, a female PhD during the time when there were very few female PhDs. Of interest, her husband was a pediatrician, and so I used to go on rounds with him on Saturday mornings. So I had a lot of shadowing experiences before many other people had shadowing experiences as well. So Saturday morning rounds, followed by a lovely lunch, was an often told Saturday when I wasn't going back to Tufts to go fetch the mice or do something with the mice and bring them back, at least during senior year. So got into Sinai and felt comfortable with Sinai, in particular in view of the fact that, I was Jewish and had not had a lot of exposure to New York City per se, but had no fears about being in New York. Boston was pretty cosmopolitan. We did lots of things as a family, and so New York was a place where I had some distant relatives and had a little bit of security from those distant relatives. If I ever needed to go see cousin Mary in Brooklyn, I could do it if I needed to, but I never did, which I guess then takes us to another one of your points, which is, so what was medical school like? Yeah. So in those days, there were very few of us women. They co-located 3 of us in one apartment, and that didn't work so well with one of the medical students who wanted to be a surgeon, was from New York City, and had a medical student boyfriend at NYU. In any case, she left, but some of that stress and strain was taken away by the incredible collegiality that we had as a very small medical school class. Early on, we divvied ourselves up into dissection partners, and I had wonderful dissection partners who, if you look through the yearbook, you can see pictures of me with them. Among the women, the 3 of us that were co-located, there was one other student who was married.
And can I ask, you mentioned that at Connecticut College you had a lot of female professors. I'm assuming anyway that experience was different when you got to Mount Sinai, that it was mostly male.
Absolutely.
Professors,
it was absolutely mostly Jewish white males was essentially mostly the then leadership of the different divisions and departments and the basic science group versus the clinical group, with the sole exception of Lottie Strauss, who was a pathologist and worked very closely with Hans Popper, who was a very senior pathologist with a specific expertise in liver disease. That will come around in a minute when I tell you more about some of the work that I did with R01 grants in the future. And a few other women who were in the division, or then I guess you would call it department, in hematology. So I believe that hematology was its own department because of the strength of hematology at Sinai. So essentially, we as medical students, as the few of us that were in the first incoming class were led to believe, we were walking among the giants, and we were very respectful of that as a class. These were the people that wrote the textbooks of hematology, the textbooks of cardiology, the textbooks of surgery. And for me, a further diversion, if you will, was in the person that ran the Department of Pediatrics, and that was Dr. Horace Hodes, who we were not exposed to early on in years 1 and 2 to quite the same degree. But somehow or other, I found where the pediatricians were, where the neonatologists were, and where the famous Stanley Umansky was. So Stanley Umansky was Dr. Horace Hode's right hand. He was in charge of medical school, medical student training and resident training, and was omnipresent. I mean, he was there at 6 a.m. He was there at 9 p.m. If you were a student or a resident having any degree of difficulty, issues, conflict with a nurse, unable to get yourself into the delivery room because the doors were locked and yet you were supposed to be there. I mean, whatever the circumstance was, you could depend upon him to help you. He was a very, very important part of my medical school training, as really was the whole of the Department of Pediatrics. Probably at least in part because there were always graham crackers and Hershey bars on all of the pediatric floors. And so Dr. Hode then became, for me, a very, very crystallizing force when it came to deciding on internships. And again, it was Vietnam. By that point, I was married. I got married in May of my junior year, moving into my senior year. And my husband was in internal medicine at NYU. And then it's sort of like, well, okay, you're going to be an intern now. You know, what's this potentially going to look like, and how is it going to fit into the whole vision of you and your future? And so, again, he was highly influential in helping me think through and walk through options. And so my husband got accepted into the U.S. Public Health Service, and he was luckily positioned at the NIH in Bethesda, doing some very, very interesting infectious disease research related to what his future career was going to be in, which was in neurology. And it's like, oh my goodness, well, now what are my options? If I'm going to be in the Bethesda or Washington, D.C. area for pediatrics, where do I go? And this is where Dr. Hodes and Stanley, provided a tremendous amount of support. And it was like, well, you could go to Georgetown, but it's not really a very good program. You could go to Hopkins, but you'll have to live on campus because that's the only way that Hopkins dealt with interns. By the residency, you could live off campus, but when you were an intern, you had to live literally in an apartment building that would allow you to run across the street and care for a child at any moment of the day or night. And that would have meant quite a drive for my husband. And then the third option, which is the one that I took with his support, was to go to Children's National, which was then called Children's Hospital of DC. And academically, he didn't really think too much of it, but he thought that I could get a excellent clinical exposure, in particular an urban clinical health exposure that would basically allow me to take whatever next steps I wanted to take. And so I followed his recommendation. I was an intern and a resident there. I was then mentored by another white Jewish male, by the name of Sanford Lycan, who was the chief of pediatric hematology oncology and ran all of the clinical laboratories. And so he saw in me, oh my goodness, this person knows how to homogenize tissue. She knows how to measure proteins. She knows what a spectrophotometer is. And she knows all about all sorts of different pieces of equipment that are absolutely needed to run a clinical lab as well as a research lab. And so he then encouraged me to do the best, most highly prized fellowship that I could possibly do and come back to run the clinical labs, hematology and blood banking labs of Children's Hospital and be a clinician, physician scientist at Children's. So that happened. So I ended up doing a fellowship at Cornell because it was extraordinarily strong in red cell biology and also hemophilia. And I spent time at Memorial Sloan Kettering as part of my experience in oncology. And then I spent some additional time at the New York Blood Center. When you combined all of those things, I was now going to be a certified, if you will, put certified in quotes, pediatric hematologist with expertise in transfusion medicine. And that's what I did. So that has been my career. I'm known by some as the mother of pediatric transfusion medicine. I'm known by others as the grandmother of pediatric transfusion medicine.
Or how about the queen of transfusion?
could be the queen. I established the transfusion medicine service at Children's. I established the blood donor service at Children's. I introduced different kinds of therapeutic apheresis for sickle cell disease that was very unique at its time. I have mentored over 30 residents, fellows, junior faculty, most of whom continue in the field of pediatric hematology, many specifically in transfusion medicine, or if not transfusion medicine, at least sickle cell disease and hemophilia. Participated in any number of cooperative studies in those areas over the years with Children's as a site, including all of the most important ones that really have determined the therapeutic initiatives that now exist for sickle cell disease and for hemophilia. And I backed off the oncology part somewhat, but really kept my fingers in the pot, I guess you could say, when it comes to the regenerative biology thread, because a lot of the work that I've done has involved some kind of immune-mediated diseases or disorders, including stem cell transplant.
Well, it sounds like you've had an extremely interesting and rich and satisfying career.
Indeed, I have, and I'm still at it. So when I was at Cornell, that was where more strong women came in. The head of the hemophilia program was a woman whose husband was a pediatrician. This seems to be a sort of theme for me. And she kept up with me up until the day that she died. We would go at our annual American Society Hematology meetings. We always had either dinner, if not dinner, a glass of wine to catch up. She would always check in on my work-life balance, and again was a really, really terrific resource for me. As was her best friend, who was an adult hematologist, not oncologist, adult hematologist at Cornell. They, had lunch every day together, who also took an interest in me and was always available to answer questions about what kind of a nanny should I be looking for at this point in life. You might think of these issues as being very superficial, but they were really, really helpful because there was no such thing as a Women in Medicine and Science program. So I was NIH funded for over 15 years, CDC and Maternal and Child Health Board funded for probably 27 years. I continue to be NIH funded, not with primary research projects now, but with what's called R25. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about that because that's my legacy. What R25s are educational awards. And I have been blessed with several of these over the years. I'm moving into one that's in its 15th year, which is called the Science Education Partnership Award, or SEPA. Comes out of the National Institute of General Medical Sciences, or NIGMS. We started to develop a program for DC public school, elementary school kids, which was called Being Me. We have taken that and we modified it into something called Science with Dr. Bear that has gone to different out-of-school time programs like Boys and Girls Clubs, Girl Scouts of the D.C. and metro area, and also to the D.C. Public Library system. And that same sort of concept of modules about science, background feeding into health and health preventative measures using hands-on fun activities will continue with this next grant, which will be focused on hospitalized kids, and it's called Journeys. So this is called Journeys with Dr. Bear. And then the second thread is high school. We also have another R25 that takes DC area underrepresented minority kids and brings them into the hospital for a summer experience. And that was funded by the National Institute of Child Health and Development. And we have two pending similar grants, which are being reviewed by different NIH institutes, one in the January timeframe, and we're putting one in today, actually, to the National Cancer Institute. I also supervise what's called the K-12 program. So a K-12 program is for fellows and junior faculty, and I run a T32, which is also NIH funded, which is for fellows. So if you sort of look across the so-called pipeline or spectrum, we've got the little kids in elementary school, high school kids. I leave the residents out to other people. And then I jump to the fellows and the junior faculty. And I will continue to do some of that, not all of it, but some of it moving forward.
Well, you know what I'm struck with is that throughout your story of having some really incredible mentors and guides, from your Harvard Square couple to your high school internship to all of the other people throughout your educational career, and that what you've done is tried to replicate that for other folks in this very systematic way.
Yeah, so when pulling some of this stuff together for the Jacoby Award, one thing that struck my husband and I is that it's sort of bookended. Yeah. The thing that I'll send you from Children's is also kind of interesting. I took care of this child's mother, and so I took care of the mom when she was his age, and now took care of this child from the time that he was born to age 11. And that's sort of also a little bit of a bookending, I guess.
Yeah. I'm wondering what you would tell a prospective medical student who's looking at Mount Sinai or any other medical school, kind of any wisdom that you would share with them about that.
I think that it's critically important to make lemonade out of the lemons. You may have a degree of disappointment, but there's always, if you look carefully, there are always people there, wherever you are, who can help and direct you. And so you need to find those mentors, and it's got to be more than one, who are peer mentors, who are career mentors, who are skill-based mentors, and basically envelop all of them into mentoring and supporting and being an ally in your career development.
Is there anything else that you want to make sure to capture?
Well, I think that there are names that resonate with me. I mean, visuals of these people helping me and showing me things. And, so Dr. Hodes showing how to appropriately do a physical exam on a preemie versus a physical exam on a toddler. It's Stanley always being there with a smile on his face. There was another hematologist by the name of Zarkowski who did a lot of our microscopy training and was a red cell microscopist. And he, was just fabulous. And I was able to to scrub with Dr. Aufsis in surgery, and that was remarkable. And there is one other memory. So one of the most famous OBs in the time was Percy Klingenstein, and I was able to do a cesarean with Percy Klingenstein. And I have very low blood pressure, which is probably why I'm still in fairly decent shape. And I fainted in the delivery room. And that was a memory. And there are other names as well. Dr. Popper, for example, who was very, very influential in hepatic pathology. You know, I've got two manuscripts on the effect of iron overload on the livers of kids with primary hematologic disease. And, you know, have been on innumerable task forces about the influence of hemolysis on hepatic pathology. You know, what can I say? I mean, they were just fabulous, fabulous individuals. Lou Alladort being another name who taught me everything I needed to know about coagulation and hemophilia, and was a very, very close colleague of Margaret Hilgartner at Cornell. I mean, they basically ran this New York City hemophilia program together.
It sounds like if we needed to distill down some of your wisdom, it would really be open to all of the wonderful mentors that you have that you might not even realize at the time are going to be your mentors. Well, great. And really, my final question is, what was this experience like for you, reflecting back on your early life and medical education and career?
Well, it was wonderful because a lot of names came rolling on back, and it really was a truly incredible experience, not the least of which is that through one of my Mount Sinai Medical School colleagues who went to college with my husband, Arnie Prywis, and he was married, I think, or engaged. He was engaged? Oh, he had a girlfriend. Okay. So my husband is sitting here listening to me. And so I was invited to a party. I don't know why I thought he was married, but he had a girlfriend who eventually he did marry. And I hardly ever dated in college. I mean, you know, I was a grind, as you might have imagined, and, you know, really didn't date much at all. And so he invited me, and my husband was also invited. He was at Einstein, but he had gone to college with Arnie. And Prywis said to me, "I'm going to introduce you to the guy that you're going to marry." And I basically said to him, you know, you are just full of it. I mean, I'm having a fabulous time. I'm dating surgical residents. I'm dating, you know, all of these people, none of the guys in my class. I mean, we made it very, very clear, I think, as a group that was not going to be good for us as a whole medical class. So there was very little of that. Remember, this is the small class. And lo and behold, you know, he was right. That was it. Absolutely. And we've been married 51 years. So there you
congratulations.
Go. And to the Jacoby medallion, because that really was wonderful. And, you know, notably, I think I am one of very, very few people from outside of Sinai who have received it, with the exception of actually my dissection partner, Jeffrey Flyer. And I guess I had received the Distinguished Alumni Award in advance of the Jacoby. But the Jacoby was so meaningful because Jacoby, of course, is the grandfather or father of pediatrics. It was very meaningful for me personally, and it was very meaningful for my family, my granddaughter Emma and my sister, my son Ben, daughter-in-law, and Norm. We were all there together. You know, it was, I think, particularly lovely for me to be able to have my granddaughter, who's 9, kind of listen to my story.
Well, again, congratulations for that, and I'm so glad that it was a family affair too, that you were able to share with the next generation.
Wonderful to speak to you.
You as well. Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.